Thanks for coming, folks. I'm going to take a picture because I always forget to do that. Because we have to put media out there. I'm glad you guys are sitting in the front row. I am not an expert on race relations. I'm a military history buff, and during my research in various military activities on the Cape, racial things came into it. So that's what I'm going to talk about, things I hit by accident. She's the expert on the racial part of it. But luckily, Camp Edwards was home to the Yankee Division. And as far as racial relationships go, it was better than a lot of other divisions. And this is all these are buildings and stuff on the base. However, the Yankee Division, here they are coming after it in from Middleborough, a 43-mile walk in August. Yeah, 43 miles. They'd often do 13 miles to a firing range with a 60-pound pack, fire the guns on the beach all day, come back, 13 miles with 60 pounds on their backs. That's how the physical conditioning these guys went through. They went on the Carolinas maneuvers pre our entrance, and this is the fall of 1941. And here, the Yankee Division, and one of the reasons that maybe, the Yankee Division wasn't as bad with race was that their anthem was the battle hymn of the Republic. And so at every event, they'd be singing the back, and they obviously, the units fought in the Civil War to free black people. But when they went to Carolina, they encountered Jim Crow racism, a lot of the guys for the first time. Southern hospitality was a thing. They had weekends off. KFC wasn't a thing, so they experienced fried chicken for the first time, a lot of them down there. But this is the souvenir yard-long photograph that they had from that was sold. I don't know if it was made by the Army or not, but it's quite a bit of propaganda. There's the high-tech weapons and stuff. Here is your Southern family. Colonel Sanders, like I said before, they had Colonel Sanders. But in the same, and they have Mammy in the back, in the same picture, they cobbled together this unbelievably racist picture. Yeah, because this is obviously not a real scene. They took a picture of the kids eating watermelon, cotton shack, and all that stuff. World War II was a great boon to the African American community in the South. Prior to World War II, 90% of African Americans were sharecroppers or domestic servants. So when they came north to go to the factories, to go to the shipyards in the South and all that, it really changed their economic point of view. So there is some good in everything, and there's some bad in everything. The Yankee Division, like I said, were better than most. They entered combat in November of '44, and the first unit they fought with was the 761st. Black Panthers. They were a black tank unit. Now, prejudice can have benefits. This tank unit, which was forced down the Army's throat by Mrs. Roosevelt, was kept together and kept out of combat for years. So these men trained together. They trained on Fort Hood, and they trained against the tank destroyer battalions that are there. So you have these white tank destroyer battalions doing their very best to beat the Black Panthers at the war games during practice. They became so good at the armored hide and seek. The tank destroyer motto is seek, strike, destroy. They changed it to sneak, peek, and run away. So They did fight, and they had met the night before they went to combat, and they had talked normally with the guys, and like I said, they fought well together. One of the Black Panthers' Sherman tanks was hit by an 88 round. The tank commander was blown clear, but severely wounded. From behind a berm, a Yankee Division sergeant asked him if he's hurt, and he goes, "I'm hurt bad." He climbed down the berm and dragged the tank commander to safety. However, as they were going over the far side of the berm, a German popped up with a burp gun and killed the sergeant. The tank commander always wanted to know the name of the man who saved his life. So, like I said, luckily the Yankee Division had a better record than some with that. After the war, they're down south, and a Black Panther comes on the bus, and there's Yankee Division troops on the bus, and of course down south they had to ride in the back of the bus. And one of the Yankee Division soldiers stands up, puts his hand on his .45 and goes, "He's sitting up front with us, we fought together." So again, they did have a much better relationship with the Yankee Division. The next group we're going to talk about is the 369th. Does anybody know the 369th? Harlem Hellfighters of World War I fame. They were a black unit, a regiment that fought in World War I under the French, because the French wanted troops, and Pershing didn't want to give them any white troops, so he sent them the black troops, and they fought really well, and they got the nickname the Harlem Hellfighters. The Massachusetts Connection, prior to being federalized, the National Guard units in Massachusetts had black units. There was a unit from Roxbury, et cetera. But when they were federalized, the federal government said you can't have any black units in your association. So they sent men from Massachusetts down to join the 369th. And I don't know if they got their snake emblem from the guys from Massachusetts, but of course we had the "Don't Tread on Me" snake, and this is a variation of that. And the snake will become important. The 369th in World War II, there's the Harlem Hellfighters coming back, marching. In World War II, the infantry regiment was turned into an anti-aircraft unit, and they were training on Camp Edwards. They, in his memoir, it's very hard for me to find any information on the black units that were there, because in '43 they all disappeared. So, and they didn't write a lot of unit histories on them and stuff like that. They were attached to other units, but they didn't. The unit history of the Amphibious Corps doesn't mention the African American troops that were assigned with them. They don't consider them part of the. So it's hard for me to find research on them. But in William Morris's memoir, "The Soldier Who Wagged His Tail," he mentions that he's on Camp Edwards. They're going to go fire the guns on Scorton Neck, and all the equipment's packed up, and he developed a terrible toothache. And he goes to see the unit's dentist, and he says, "All my stuff's in crates. I can't help you." So he went AWOL and went down to New York City to see his own dentist, and then came back, snuck under the fence to get back on the base. What's not mentioned in the memoir is the reason he had to go home is he couldn't see the white dentists on the base. Because while the Yankee Division was out doing coastal patrol after Pearl Harbor, the base was run by a cadre of old Southern cavalry officers. And they basically put Jim Crow into practice on the base. So he gets back just in time, December 7th, from his tooth getting pulled, and they rush his anti-aircraft unit out to the bridges, and they set up their 40mm guns to let the people of Cape Cod know they're protected. But it was a totally just a feel-good thing. They didn't let them take any ammunition with them.
Could you say his name again, please?
William Morris. And again, if at the end of this presentation, I'll go around and talk about the pictures, and we have him and more of his story. He, unit that had the snakes on them were all tough inner city kids, and all of them boxed. I can't emphasize enough how big boxing was in the 40s. Joe Louis was a hero not just to the African American community, but he was a hero to the whites because he beat the German Superman, Max Schmeling. So they all boxed. They sent the 369th Anti-Aircraft Unit immediately in February to Hawaii to protect Hawaii against another attack, air attack, which actually happened with flying boats, and people don't know about that. The guys got out there, and the Marine Corps was the last branch of the military to integrate, have African American Marines, Mumford Point Marines. In fact, when they finally did get black Marines, a black Marine back on leave in Chicago was arrested by a white cop because he thought he was impersonating a Marine. That's how, yeah. So they got there, and the Marines picked fights with the newly arrived anti-aircraft men. But like I said, they're tough inner city kids and knew how to box. So it got around Hawaii very quickly. Don't mess with the African American men wearing the rattlesnake pins. The reputation became so strong, other African American units, when they went on leave into Honolulu, would ask to borrow the rattlesnake pins to wear on their uniform. Again, they rushed to the bridges. And Joe Louis was a huge hero to African Americans and to whites, and he was very instrumental in the cause for civil rights. People don't know, but Jackie Robinson was in the 761st Black Panthers, and he was in Fort Hood, Texas, and as a lieutenant, he refused to ride in the back of the bus. And so they were court-martialing him. And Joe Louis came to his defense. And it may have been one of the reasons Jackie learned to control himself when he integrated baseball, is they didn't find him guilty, but they took him out of the 761st Black Panthers and sent him to a supply unit. And he didn't want it, he wanted to stay with his men. I mentioned too that prejudice can be bad. So the 761st Black Panthers trained together for years, much longer than in most units. And they got to read the after-action reports when the U.S. tanks came across Tiger tanks and Panthers and stuff like that. And they actually figured out a German tank could fire a shell that would go through the front armor, through the transmission, through the driver, through the engine, out the other side of a Sherman. Their guns were so much better than ours. But, like I said, they got to read the after-action reports. And all German tanks had hand-cranked turrets. So they would swing very slowly. So what they used to do when they came to a Panther tank is they'd have two Shermans rush up as fast as they could, firing and weaving, because they knew it couldn't track them as they moved. But of course, if they made a mistake, they're dead and get into close enough range where they could take out the Sherman tank. The 761st Black Panthers were the highest scoring tank battalion, independent tank in World War II. But because of prejudice, they were held back, stayed together for years, trained hard against the white tank destroyers, and got to read all the after-action reports. So prejudice can be good. It was good for them. But back to Joe Louis. He came to do a morale boosting tour, and he fought on Camp Edwards, and he fought on Washburn Island with his boxing team. 8,000 people, troops, watched him fight in the amphitheater on the base. 2,000 saw him fight on Washburn Island.
I read something, you mentioned, he said I could interject when, I'm gonna forget this because I didn't put it on my slides. And so I started last year with Cape Cod Genealogy Society, looking up some of the newspaper reports, and I have to still verify, everybody verify for me. But Joe Lewis's last name was really Barrow. Joe Louis Barrow, okay? No one pays attention to that. I've never seen that before until this week as I was researching this. First of all, Barrows, or Barrow, is a lot of Cape Verdeans are named that up in this area, okay? Or, you know, we're part Portuguese, so some of that. So I wondered where he came from. You know, so he was born in the South, but I'm wondering, and lightheartedly, the paper said that probably his mother didn't want him fighting boxing. So when he went to go sign on to help make money, either he left his last name off on purpose, or he had a big signature, and so it didn't fit on the application. So take a look, here's something to think about, and I'm gonna research it further, but I believe his name was Joe Louis Barrow.
Well, on a similar note, the man who retired his career was Rocky Marciano, who's actually born Rocco Marcigliano. He shortened it to But after Rocky knocked him out, he cried. Because they made Joe Louis go back and fight because he owed money in taxes, even though he had donated all this time and took time out of his career to serve in the military. It was a travesty to make the old Joe fight, and Rocky had to fight him so he could get his money, but after he knocked him out, he cried. Here he is signing autographs. He then went to there was a base hospital, and Joe Louis visited the wounded soldiers. Signed autographs. And that's AI. I have an old grainy newspaper thing, but AI turned into something much better. How much of a hero was Joe Louis to the white troops? There was a soldier who had his eyes damaged in North Africa. He asked the bandages be taken off early so he could see the champ. And here he is. I'm sorry, it's not framed right. That's Joe directing the band at the colored USO club in Mashpee. So all the other USO clubs were for whites only on the Cape. So we had to think, oh, there was still stuff going on. Now this is interesting because it lists Mashpee, and this is the newspaper of the base, and I'm wondering why it didn't say colored USO or something like that, so anybody reading the paper would see that it was a colored USO. But the interesting thing is the times of the other USO events are written out completely with the 7.00. If you notice, the times on the Mashpee ones are just one letter. I don't know if that's a code to let people know, or it's interesting. Again, it's one of the things I found when I was doing research for this. It was written differently. And they weren't, this is also a cartoon from the Camp News. The caption, which is off, things is, never mind, so I don't need no bayonet because he's got a straight razor. So they weren't opposed to using racial stuff in the newspaper. Well, again, why it didn't say colored USO, I don't know. And this, again, is giving Tojo a poke in the face. So they were prejudiced against Japanese too. Just don't think, you know. There's Joe Louis on Washburn Island. Now, he added the Washburn Island to his 100 fight tour. And this picture was in Life magazine. In the picture, there's only white troops. However, there's a Path A newsreel of this fight, and the cameraman pans, and there's 4,000 troops, 2,000 of them African American. So there were 2,000 African Americans in Falmouth. So again, we have a hard time piecing together the African American units and stuff that were here because the history's hidden. We need somebody to go, there's African American newspapers. I bet you there's a lot of stuff on units in those.
That's what I was going to say. I didn't want to, interrupt you or correct you, but guess what? There's African American histories at home in our closets as well as on newspapers.
Right.
And it wouldn't have been so much the mainstream newspapers, but the local newspapers that would only serve African Americans.
Like there's another unit, the father and son served together, again, just happened to be in the newspaper. There was African American amphibious truck companies that trained on Washburn. The only African American unit to land on D-Day was a low barrage balloon battalion. And the amphibious corps had low barrage balloons here in 42 and 43. But nowhere in its history does it mention who was manning the balloons. So we may have had the only African American unit to land on D-Day train on Cape Cod, but we can't prove it because they can't find anything about them. Here is the 385th, which is a engineer battalion. It's commanded by white officers. See the 4 white officers in the middle of the picture? I know a woman whose dad was one of the white officers. And like I said, the base was run by these crackers. Pardon my language, and if you were a white officer ordered to command a black unit, you could not go to the officers club because you served with black people. You were contaminated. That's how prejudiced they were. Now, I don't know if they thought this was funny. I don't know if it was intentional. I don't know if it's just coincidence. But 150 white troops were invited to Plymouth for dinner, Thanksgiving dinner. Here they are. And this, right next to it is an article saying that the 385th had to march miles to get to their Thanksgiving dinner. So I don't know if they thought that was funny. I don't know, it was just accidental. That's what happened.
Purposeful.
Yeah. And I was a little confused too, because it goes, contrary to the Puritan customs, however, a dance was held Thanksgiving evening at the newly opened service club. And I'm going, this is 43. The service club was open in 41. Well, I did a little more digging in the newspaper. They had a separate service club, small one behind the big one, that just opened. Because again, I was surprised that they were letting the African Americans be in the service club on Thanksgiving, and they weren't. And going through military training builds up one's confidence. They want, the skills, learning things. The Reverend Martin Luther King picked his lieutenants on his peaceful marches from ex-military men because he knew they had the discipline. to restrain themselves from provocation. The Brown versus the Board of Education was brought about for the children of African American soldiers. And the women that did the lawsuit that ended segregation on trains because they crossed state lines were both African American WACs. So the military did its thing, and it was the first major institution that was desegregated. And this is the headquarters section, and those barracks in the back was where the African American section was. And without further ado, I'll turn it over. Oh, do I have time for one more story? Where's Kurt?
It's getting a little bit late.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Barbara.
I'll just change over the computer for
There you
Barbara.
go. Thank you.
Come on up. Where part of it fall for having a little time?
I did a PowerPoint presentation, okay? Worked on it, and it doesn't always fit exactly right like he said, but so I'm taking that overview, thank you very much, because I am not an expert on the military. I didn't serve in the military. My father was a merchant marine, okay? So sadly, well, he died in 2011. Sadly,
They gave him military status eventually, Merchant Marine, veterans benefits. Did he not get it in time?
what veteran benefits did they give them? No, he did 2011. So they allowed him to be buried up here at Otis with his brothers who were in the Navy. But we searched all our lives for merchant seamen to be given the same quality of benefits as the other veterans, and as far as I know, they haven't. So let's take a look at that. I asked somebody 2 years ago.
Yeah, they did it for them. They also did it for the WASP, the women Air Force pilots. They did, but they were 90 years old when it happened. You know.
So I will talk more about the racial animus, okay? Any questions, stop me, feel free. I get deep into this if we want to, okay? Because I didn't feel the benefits of discrimination whatsoever, okay? There aren't too many benefits. Maybe there's added impact from that, but we lived it 100%. So we did these separately too, thinking how we could meld things together. You mentioned Jim Crow. So I was thrilled that you mentioned that, because of course that's where it started. We're talking about World War II, but you see the benefits of discrimination fall short for me, because once you have that prejudice, that prejudging, it impacts your entire life. It has impacted this entire country for 500 years, and it has not stopped, as we can see very well now. It has not stopped. That stain stays with us forever, okay? And it still hurts. Okay, so we know about the Jim Crow era and some of the laws. I took it from Britannica, so I wanted you to know. Of course, we know about the civil rights movement of the 1950s, but I often wonder what Martin Luther King Jr. would feel today, or any of them, Edgar Edwards, or any of them, Malcolm X, okay? Having largely avoided a firm stand on civil rights issues for nearly a decade, in 1941, Roosevelt faced a simmering that moved him off dead center. A. Philip Randolph, you talked about also the porter cars, the trains. A. Philip Randolph, the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, threatened to mobilize 100,000 African Americans to march on Washington, D.C. to protest racial segregation in the armed forces and bias against blacks in the hiring practices of the federal government. Remember, He was a black man. Remember that we all celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. and all of them that helped with the marches on Washington in the 60s. This started happening before the 60s. We have history give us certain windows of information that's more comfortable for us to talk about in mixed crowds. This wasn't comfortable. This came from a quote, okay? So historian John Hope Franklin recalled some of the prejudice blacks faced in the military. His colleague, his college-educated brother, a high school principal, was drafted into the Army and encountered a white sergeant who told him in no uncertain terms that he would dedicate his years to seeing that Franklin did nothing more exalting than peel potatoes. Okay, so you can see a professor wrote this. With the United States on the threshold of entering World War II, Roosevelt preferred to avoid unfavorable publicity from a large demonstration of people protesting racial injustice in his own backyard, urged on by Eleanor Roosevelt. And I have a picture there of her. Wesley, can you go over to there's a big framed picture. We will show that. Wesley's the president of the Taunton, look at me, I'm way back, of the Cape Cod, Cape Verdean Museum and Cultural Center. My whole life was spent in Taunton. I grew up in Taunton. And most of this that I had learned and I talk about, especially with my father, it has impacted my mind ever since I was a kid. My degree is in cultural anthropology, okay? And so I've been studying this for years. Eleanor Roosevelt, the president, met in June with Randolph and other civil rights leaders and subsequently issued an executive order creating a fair employment practice committee, the EOC. I brought this because he mentioned Eleanor Roosevelt. Somehow I thought of Eleanor Roosevelt, but when I first graduated from college, I was a non-traditional college student. I couldn't afford to go to college when I was a kid, and they didn't encourage women, never mind black women, to go to college back then. Your husband was going to take care of you, okay? He didn't. But I graduated in 2005, and I gave a presentation at the post office in Providence, and this was the gift that they gave me. It, of course, is Eleanor Roosevelt, and it sits on my wall at home, actually in my bedroom. And I smile at her every single time I go to bed. Why? It wasn't so much that Eleanor had so much to do with the military, but we all know how impressive she was. And for them to have framed this stamp as a present to me, they said they couldn't give monetary compensation, but my goodness, look at this. I couldn't be happier with this, and I've had it for 20 years now, okay? So yes, Eleanor did a lot to encourage her husband. So don't think, we always talk about the presidents and what they did for us. All of them were doing things politically advantageous to themselves, not just because they cared so much, because blacks were treated unequally. Here's something we just found out, one of my genealogy society folks. Clarence Clifford Peters, I had heard about, I see some of it is hidden underneath this, I don't know why. He was my third cousin, my mom's first cousin. We get to Cape Cod, we said about Cape Cod, I grew up in Taunton, but my grandmother lived in Harwich. I've been coming to Cape Cod since I was 10 years old, 1961. What I remembered was there was a little memorial, I will show you in a minute, to Clarence Clifford Peters, because he was reportedly the first person lost to World War II from Harwich, okay? Look at, we just found this 2 days ago. It said he was signing, it was his registration card. It said that it was his date of birth, February 11th, 25. He was 19 when he died. But what I want you to take a look at is look at the red on the top. I know that.
Was he have Native American his ancestry at all?
All Cape Verdean.
Okay.
Oh, maybe Peters.
Yeah.
Maybe the Peters came
Because
from it.
the Army, because of the Indian Wars, Native Americans can serve with the whites. And that may have been why he was able to serve in an integrated unit.
It could be, and again, that might be the answer to this. So there was Cousin Clifford that I never met. What did they do? What does it say in the red?
Changed to white by vote of board.
They first put down his race as black. Cape Verdeans, I'm told, I also worked for the federal government and the Census Bureau. We, as a nation, American rules, we're black, okay? They say Cape Verdean. We know we were a Portuguese colony, so I've had to understand and appreciate why some of them said that they were white, because of course, again, discrimination didn't help us. Because if you were non-white, and like we're hearing again today, it was not a very good living, and it was not a very healthy lifestyle. Discrimination hurts everyone, and we were even reduced to maybe non-humans, like they. Who could change that? You see the red X? It was put there purposely because they decided that in a month and a half after he signed that, who gives them the right to tell him whether he's black or white? Or, well, you know, come to think of it, we all know race is a social construct. They determined that black people were less than in the Constitution. And so there was nothing to do with race or racial animus such as it was when the Constitution was started, because men and women interracially married and had children together and all kinds of things until they decided they didn't want us. Then it all changed. Okay?
Question.
Barbara?
Mhm.
So why did they change it to white, and was it so he could get benefits?
No, they decided that he was Cape Verdean, and they decided that he was white. So what I'm told, so there was Mr. Paulo, who was lived in Taunton all of his life. I interviewed him before he died. He was a mailman and my mom's best friend, him and his wife. She was in their wedding. He said to me that when he went into the service, they first put him in the white barracks. So we talk about light skin privilege, if you will, okay? And we talk about white presenting or passing. I'm going to use Wesley again, I usually do, and he doesn't mind it. He is Cape Verdean just like me. When he doesn't have his tan, he's lighter skinned than me. He has straighter hair. So we make determinations based on phenotype, based on what we look like. And so what I have gotten a lot is, well, you're not really black. You know, you're not black. What does black mean? What does that, and you're saying it like it's supposed to be a benefit to us? But Wesley could tell you when we get to our conversations, the hell he had to go through as a kid growing up in Roxbury because we were in the middle. People say, well, you are part Portuguese, so do you think the Portuguese really wanted to own me? Really wanted to say I was their sister? Do you think we could marry? Intermarry? No, you couldn't. But guess why? Because then they had the Jim Crow laws. We're going to continue with Peter, and we will talk to you about. He had Peters. He here in Harwich. This is what they call Kelly Street. Discrimination affected everyone. It is where I remember visiting my grandmother in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s when I semi-retired and came down here to finish my life's dream of starting the Museum and Cultural Center. I went to Harwich. There's Great Western Road, you might remember. And I went looking for Kelly Street, and I couldn't find it. This piece comes from Harwich's Main Street, Brooks Academy, and down this way. I could have sworn that's where my grandmother lived. How could I have forgotten? And oh, it is now what it should have been back then, Main Street. What it was listed as, officially as Main Street. Why did they call this Kelly Street? Was that's where the blacks were. That's where the Cape Verdeans, we were black when I grew up, let me tell you. And that's where most of the blacks and Native Americans, Edie and Pumpkin Rose lived there. She's a Wampanoag elder, and he is a Cape Verdean. We intermarried because whites weren't marrying us. Whites weren't even giving us the fair shake, okay? And why do they call it Kelly Street? Well, there was a white family that lived there. Poor whites. White trash, they would call it, right? So they weren't even going to give it a name of a Cape Verdean or a black or a Wampanoag. We lovingly knew that as Kelly Street. Wesley knows that. His aunt lived in Harwich. And I'll let him tell you that story about if we think we are white or non-white, or whether passing makes a wonderful difference. It does not. It hurts even worse, okay? And so my great aunt, my grandmother and she were twins. I just found this yesterday, so in the papers, and they now have released more Negro papers or African American papers. It's not that they're not there, it's that they didn't release them, they didn't find them important enough for anybody to care, or like I said, Wesley's and my family have things sitting in the closets that nobody cared about, but it was priceless to us. That's our history. We need to share our history. But I remember coming and visiting Aunt Bernice. She lived at the end of Kelly Street. And my grandmother lived on Kelly Street. And I remember the heart went out of her as soon as she would start talking about Clifford. It was the saddest thing that ever happened. I lost 2 brothers at an earlier age. The heart went out of my mother. We weren't good enough for the jobs or fair pay or to marry the whites, but we could get killed in the war for folks. Look at the difference, okay? She's still in 68. He died in, what did we say, 44? Jim Crow up north is what we would call, these are my words, this is the Jim Crow up north. It wasn't just in the South. Wesley will tell you the heck he had to pay just to walk to school in the mornings. Okay, and back home again, taking his life in his hands. My brother was light-skinned like Wesley. He didn't acknowledge me in school because I was more the Angela Davis wannabe. I had to get into my mind, be black and be proud, or it was going to kill me inside. Well, it killed my brother. Passing did not work. We did not talk to each other in high school so much. He was dating white girls, and he first attempted suicide right after he graduated from high school, saying to me, "I'm sorry, my sister. Before they take me to the state hospital, I have to apologize to you for ever forsaking my own sister. I don't deserve to live." Discrimination didn't help me at all, or my brother. Judge Layton. So we said we'd focus a lot on Cape Cod. He grew up in New Bedford, but what do I remember? Him telling me personally before he died, all the summers that they spent here on Cape Cod picking cranberries, strawberries, and they would say blueberries. He would always say we were berry pickers. I say when we get to the museum, we are not just cranberry pickers. Because everybody says to me, we know you Cape Verdeans. And I say, if you're saying Cape Verdeans, you don't know us at all yet. And you're the cranberry pickers. We're not just cranberry pickers. We lived and died for this country. There's a whole room on military service. Each wall has a different military branch of the military, and Judge Layton has a special place on a corner of those walls because he was peeling potatoes in Boston. We said the potato peelers, this is what he could get. He talks about on his knees on the cranberry bogs. If you knew how hard that was to kneel on those vines, that he decided as an older teenager, after he graduated from high school, that he was going to be a lawyer. Didn't know where it came from, but working as a lawyer must be better than sweating in these cranberry bogs and the pain that his knees felt. Well, I hear in Howard that there was a separate school for the Cape Verdeans off of Kelly Street, and another school up at the north end for the white kids, and the white kids would get the bus and the Cape Verdeans would walk. In the winter, when it was freezing cold, they talked to the superintendent of schools from that school. One friend told me before he passed away, it was freezing cold. The teacher complained there was ice inside the windows. And the superintendent said, tell them to put their coats on. This is from the articles from Alfred M. Swanson. This history is through Judge Layton's words when he was initiated as an honorary member of the Chicago Alumni Chapter of Phi Alpha Delta Law Fraternity in October 2009, and through the collections of his friends and colleagues. Here he says it, I don't know how many of you have ever kneeled on a cranberry bog, but let me tell you what happens. Cranberry vines are like thistles, so I was there on my knees weeding, and the hot August sun was beating on my head when I got the idea that I wanted to be a lawyer. I have no explanation of how it came to me to be a lawyer. I had no kinfolk who had been a lawyer. I had never spoken to a lawyer. I didn't know what lawyers did for a living. The only explanation I had was that in the heat of the day and the pain in my knees from the vines, it must have occurred to me that there just had to be a better way of living, earning a living. Judge, as you saw on the previous one, he lived to be 105 years old. I visited him in the hospital, the VA hospital, and I said, Judge, you're going to be 105 years old next month. What are you going to do for your birthday? He said, I don't know, I'll think of something. He was a master chess player. He went to Chicago from Massachusetts because he said Massachusetts was too racist for him. He would never make it. So he went to Chicago. He was a friend of Thurgood Marshall and Eugenia Fort. This picture that I had in the car, because I didn't see a way to put it up here, but I took the picture from the wall in my museum, our museum. You notice Thurgood Marshall is on the stamp. You notice Schooner Ernestina is on the stamp. That was when they inaugurated, they named the post office in New Bedford, George and Layton Post Office. I visited him 3 or 4 times before he turned 100 and interviewed him, and still have some of the interview. And he gave me his document to be put into a book. He entrusted that to me before he died. And he said, I said to him just when Barack Obama was installed, elected president, Judge, what do you think? Did you ever think you'd live to see a black man president? He said, no, I must admit I did not. It was a very good thing that I've lived this long, Barbara. When he came to visit me in Chicago, Barack Obama, oh yes, when he was a senator and he was looking for support and asking people about what he should do. Very smart man, very brilliant young man. I told him, I'm not sure you're going to get in, but I would love it if you tried. When Martin Luther King Jr. was in the Birmingham jail, they called the judge, Thurgood Marshall and all of them. All the black judges, let's get together and go down and help Martin. And they said, he said, he had a brief to finish, and when he was done, he would pack his bags and head south. He got a call that night and said, Kennedy sent in the National Guard. We don't have to go. We're not just cranberry pickers anymore. We never were. Eugenia Forts, many of you heard of Eugenia. I say this after the judge. No, she wasn't in the military, but guess what? She lived in Harwich on Kelly Street. And in the 40s, as many of you may have already read, she was walking on the beach near the Kennedy Center because she had a homemaker's job next to the compound in Harwichport. And a cop told her to get off the beach. No blacks were allowed on the beach on Cape Cod in the 40s. She told me, I interviewed her just before she died, that where she came from, the beach belonged to everyone. She came over here at 9 years old from Cape Verde. The beach belonged to everyone. No. So she bought a house in Hyannis in addition to the house that she had in Harwich with her little housekeeper money. And the back house was where Thurgood Marshall and Martin Luther King used to rent it to stay, because also at that time, blacks couldn't get a room at the hotels on Cape Cod. Okay?
If I could interject something on
Sure.
the beaches. One of the banks had a calendar, and one of the calendar pictures was, oh, this beach in Mashpee was rented out by the Army. And I was thinking, why on earth would the Army have to rent a beach? The soldiers go on the beach. Oh, it was for the African American soldiers. So they had their own beach in Mashpee.
Part Wampanoag, intermarried with Wampanoag. I thought this land was our land. This land is your land. Who said we can't walk on the beach? Oh, now people actually own this section of the beach. What are we thinking? So it says here also, guess what? The Cape Cod chapter of the NAACP was founded by none other than Eugenia Forts. She was a lifelong member of the NAACP, along with Judge Layton, along with Thurgood Marshall, and she founded it here. Was there racism on Cape Cod? Oh, absolutely. But we persevere through it, okay? And so in Harwich, the chief of police became, and I know some of it slipped because that's what it does on your PowerPoint when you hook it up like this. But Stanley Rainio, John Stanley Rainio, he died in 2001, and he had Bronze Star for heroism and meritorious service in World War II. He served as chief of police for 25 years in Harwich, and right now the building is named after John Rainio. How come you don't find these things celebrated everywhere? So plenty of places they have a Black History Trail. Wouldn't I love to have a Black History Trail on Cape Cod? Why not? He showed you all of the discrimination and the denigration that we took. Where's the celebration? People say to me, you started this museum, you and Wesley? In what, just 2021? We are the only Cape Cod, Cape Verdean Museum and Cultural Center in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Why did it take so long? You tell me. Why you? If not now, then when? If not me, then who? If not us, then we did it. We just do it. So who is this? This is, of course, your former chief of police, Paulino, okay? And he was chief of police, as it says, from 83 to 93, but you kind of can't read there. He honored this town by serving for 38 and a half years. When do you hear from Paulino? His picture is up there in the police station. Maybe you folks don't go to the police station so much, but we celebrated him. Some of you knew of the Colonel. His last name was Montero on Sandwich Road in T-Ticket. He owned the strawberry farm there, Cricket Hill Farm. This was his sister, and she became Paulino's wife. He had I had a picture that I brought too. He had a tank in the war that she let us borrow. Wesley went to visit her. She's in her 90s. We borrowed it for the museum, if you come and see. And it says on the front, Miss Cape Cod. I get the shivers. She was his girl when he was young, and he served in the war, came back, and served this town immensely. Where's all the celebrations on Paulino or the Monteros? So here was another person, Manuel Barros. I said Barrow was Joe Lewis's last name. We have a lot of Barrows here. Some have the W on it, some have no S. People changed our names just like the slaves. They said, you didn't come over here as slaves. We were treated like slaves. They changed our name, they changed our race code. Who does that? How can you do that, is what I say. And so he was trained here. He also, you didn't know of him because he died 1 month after his 24th birthday. The family is proud. We have his information not only in our archives, but his picture on our wall. I put my cousin Darwin here. The younger man, he served in the Coast Guard, Vietnam War. I know we said World War II mostly, but that's his father. That's his father's mother. She is part indigenous. Actually, what Darwin told me when they lived over in California, he was a Black Panthers, the other Black Panthers that helped in the Watts riots. He said he was treated so badly in the Coast Guard, we're talking the 60s. They tried to throw him overboard in the cold ice. He had to have somebody watch him because you know how they used to kind of fun and pull the sheets over you at night. What did they call that? And they would choke him. He thought he was
Blanket party. Blanket party.
Blanket party. Darwin has PTSD. He cries when he talks about this still. Big, heavy set man. They call him Two Bears because the Wampanoags thought he was like two bears. His grandmother used to get money. She loaned her land or leased it in what did I say, Oklahoma. And she is, and I didn't write it down, but he says he thinks what tribe that she was in was Cherokee. And he's not positive, but the point here is Darwin actually said, so we're talking about World War II, World War I, we're talking about now. I started to cry when he said to me one time, he turned around to get out of the shower. 2 Southern guys were standing there, and they were looking at his rear end. I thought, what were they going to do to you? He said, oh no. They told him they were looking for the nub. What nub? where the tail fell off in the order of evolution. Excuse me?
Yeah, white soldiers in England told English women that the African American soldiers had tails.
Discrimination didn't help us. In the car, I also have a big signed picture. This is 4-star General Gary Brito. No, he wasn't World War II. I kind of wanted to end this with a happier note, if there is a happy note, in the racism that happened throughout this country, throughout all the wars, throughout its inception. 4-star General Gary Brito was born in Hyannis. He just retired in 25 after 38 years of service. This was in Hyannis. He was giving the oath to the young new recruits. What I don't have here, that's still in the car, is I saw Rep. David Vieira there. And he said, "Barbara, what are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, I was introduced to Gary Brito. I'm hoping he will interview for our next documentary on Cape Verdeans in the military." He said he would when he came here, not on official duty. He emailed us last summer and said, "I am retiring. And I've been asked through all over the country if I could give them a signed picture of me in my uniform. I would be remiss," he said, "if I didn't offer one to the Cape Verdean Museum on Cape Cod, because that's where my heart is, that's where my home is." We've got it. I got it in the car if we had time to. I didn't have any place to put it all up, but you could see it anytime you'd like. And I said, "Would you still be willing to interview for us at FCTV?" And he said, "I have 38 years of stories to tell you." Okay? There's where we end. Thank you. And I know we said if we had any questions, I know I hit you with a lot of hard stuff, but this is what we live. What do you think? Questions, anyone? We can move over, we can sit together.
I can move these chairs. It's a very loose format so that you guys are more or less face to face with each other. And bring up anything that's
Anything
about
that
what you saw. Or
burning desire, curious. I could get you started with something here. Sure.
Is the museum in Hyannis?
Oh, no, sorry, you didn't know. The Cape Cod Cape Verdean Museum and Cultural Center is in East Falmouth, on Davisville Road at the Emerald House. Okay, when we first came here to look at a space, what they asked what we needed, and I said, we need especially to save some money. I tried it in Harwich, 2 things. Most of the elders said they were Portuguese. That hurt me. You can be Portuguese, but they didn't want me to talk anything about the African side of us. I am 3/4 Senegalese in my DNA. What do you mean don't talk about the African side of us? So we don't say that there's reverse racism, because racism only happens when you have the power. And we can tell since this country's inception, we've never had the power to oppress you the way this country oppressed our folks. But it's not reverse racism. But if you're like me in Wesley and you are not proud of our country that just turned 50 years young, they fought the Portuguese against their colonialism, 500 years of being colonized, just 50 years. We're one of the youngest countries, but we're an African nation. Cape Verde is 380 miles off the west coast of Africa near Senegal. So it makes sense that I'm mostly Senegalese. I've felt it all my life. This is why I said be proud of who I am. It's not that my father didn't care. He was the first president of the Taunton NAACP. But when I went down to sign my Social Security card, I had to sit there and say, What do I put? 1967? What do I put? He had told me to check other and write in Cape Verdean. I didn't want to be an other. What, an alien being, different? And what does other mean to anybody? The race codes were white, black, remember, Spanish, Hispanic, they would say, we don't say that anymore, and Native American, even remember they had Eskimo on there one time, okay? Those kinds of things that we don't even see, they change it as they feel. I put black, and I walked home feeling like I'm on cement boots, because I know my father is not going to like that. He was the darkest of his family, about my complexion. All of his other 5 brothers looked like Wesley. When they got into the Navy, his 2 older brothers said there was an opportunity for them to get a promotion, but they had to decide which one of them was going to do it. And don't tell anybody that the other was their brother. The lightest skinned one decided he would say he was white, but he couldn't tell the other folks that the other one was his brother. And I had said to him, honestly, I flew to Florida in the 90s to visit with Uncle Tony, who got blinded on the beach of Normandy. Why did you do that to your brother? He hates you to this day for, discriminating against him. And he said, we had to make a living, Barbara. My parents died when your father was 10 years old. I was 22. We got into the service to be able to keep the house, keep the family together. But East Boston at that time, if you were black or newly arrived immigrant, you got nothing. So we had to pass in order to make a living. So it helped me a little bit, because it did keep my father there at the household. But when my father told me he came in from a service out in the ocean, a bar in East Boston, and he said my brother Tony was there, sitting at the bar talking to the bartender. And the bartender said, Tony, isn't that your brother? He never answered him. My father hated him for that. But you see what the necessity is then when I'm born, me and my brother are in high school. He tells my brother to pass because you'll have a better life. And he tells me to go take that black off of your card. Go back down to the Social Security office and change it. And I said, no. I'm black and I'm proud, and I am going to live the rest of my life showing people that somebody that looks like this can be proud too. Yes?
Well, I wanted to say thank you for doing this program. Such great information and important information. You both had a lot of information and so much passion in your subject and conveying it, and I'm really glad that you were able to do it. I have a question about the Cape, because I'm relatively new and getting to know it. And I heard someone said, oh, the Ku Klux Klan was on the Cape. Have you ever heard that? Is that true?
Yes and yes. Don't think that they're not here. I ran for city council once in Taunton in 2001. I didn't get in. You're still not ready for somebody like me. But they said I did a good job. I say air quotes sister-in-law. My brother had 2 children by her sister. They didn't get married. But she was a Portuguese, white Portuguese, city councilor and lawyer. And she called me up one day crying. And she said, I'm sorry, I found this in my mailbox and I can't believe we still have to go through this. I said, go through what, Sherry? And she said that the Ku Klux Klan had put this in her mailbox the year I was running for council and wanted to know if she wanted to join. Our niece and nephew are half Cape Verdean, half Portuguese, so black. And she said they must have just seen me going in my house or noted my face, or she lives on a side of Taunton that's not black. And so she said she found that. She said, I'm a lawyer. I'm Robert and Jazz's auntie, and I am sickened by it. That was Taunton. They're here. They're here. And they're getting stronger.
Joe,
Yeah.
did any of those units that you brought up, did they only fight in Europe, or did any of them fight in the Pacific?
Well, the 369th went to Hawaii.
But did they go to
Then
the islands?
the truck, amphibious truck companies, the African American, they were African American truck companies in Iwo Jima. So no, it went both ways.
And
Depends.
did any of them ever get a citation or anything?
Yeah, very unusual. The Marines gave the medals to an African American truck company that rescued Marines that in their landing craft that got hit, and they gave them silver stars and stuff like that. So it was very unusual. The cameramen on Iwo Jima, if they were filming, and there were 80,000 white Marines, there were 800 black Marines. So they didn't win the battle or anything like that. But if a camera was filming and a black Marine came into view, he'd stop filming. Because they didn't want them to. There's very few photographs of the black Marines that were there. They mainly were, again, not in combat, but they were doing the ammo dumps and stuff like that. But there is one photograph of the African Americans that served in Iwo Jima because they volunteered to go out and get wounded Marines and bring them back. But they also, the picture that's famous is they were carrying a emaciated Japanese prisoner. And I think the reason they were photographed, they wanted to show how humane we were to the Japanese prisoner. And so they were a bycatch in that photograph.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there were African Americans in the Pacific Theater. Montford Point Marines, I think they did serve in combat in Saipan when they were getting Banzai attacked. Iwo Jima, the very last throw the Japanese did after the island was declared secure, 400 Japanese left the caves up in the north part and snuck down and attacked the rear area where the pilots were, because they were using P-51s to fly escort on the B-29s. And there was the black Marines there helped repel them and finish off the last part of that battle.
Remind me, what year was Iwo Jima?
1945.
45, okay. And you said the Japanese. I'm saying that because here's another interesting tidbit that fits with this. My cousin from Taunton was over in the war and married a Japanese woman, Aiko. I loved her. She came back to Taunton, but she then, of course, wanted to learn all about the Cape Verdean culture, the Cape Verdean dishes, the Cape Verdean cuisine. Her grandson grew up with her, one of her favorites. He is a member of our museum, Casey. His mother married a Scottish man, so he's part Cape Verdean, part Japanese, and part Scottish. When I came back from going to Cape Verde the first time in '97 for a URI Rick Summer Seminar abroad, he was a freshman in high school. And I had said one of the things I would have loved to have had when I was in school was, of course, some of this information. Cabo Verde didn't get independence until '75. I graduated in '69, so it wasn't even a full nation yet, the Republic. So I went back in '97 when Casey was there, and I started a Cape Verdean club. There was no such thing for us. Casey became the president of that club 4 years later. And I said to him, so I'm curious, my friend, part Cape Verdean, part Japanese, part Scottish. What made you pick the Cape Verdean side of you? His Scottish grandparents were prejudiced. His mother looked white. His Japanese, he said, what am I going to do with the Japanese part of me? Nobody here could speak Japanese or know anything about the culture. I grew up with my grandmother who learned all about the Cape Verdean culture through living in this neighborhood. And they're the warmest, most wonderful people I've met. I love the food. So he speaks Creole, Cape Verdean, Portuguese better than I do. And he's a nurse now, and he's in Cape Verde right now. He's looking to buy a piece of property out there. He said he feels more comfortable in Cabo Verde than he does here in America.
Speaking of Japanese, I'm going to put in.
Go ahead.
We had 5,000 German POWs on Camp Edwards. We had one Japanese prisoner of war on Camp Edwards. He came. Well, the Japanese took over some of the islands in the Alaska, and when we took them back, most of them put their rifle in the mouth and pulled the trigger with their big toe. But this guy surrendered, and they didn't want him on the West Coast. So they brought him, and they didn't put him in a stockade or anything like that. He actually lived at one of the fire stations. And you ever see McHale's Navy? They had Fuji. He was like Fuji.
Yeah.
He swept. That was his job, to sweep the fire station. He didn't speak any English. They didn't speak any Japanese. He couldn't run away because he was the only Japanese guy on Cape Cod. But we had one Japanese POW.
Wow.
Good
Wow.
story.
Isn't that a neat story? Yes.
Yeah, if I recall from a recent trip to the Whaling Museum in New Bedford, it seemed that the first and biggest initial influx of Cape Verdeans to this country was because of the whaling industry. Is that so?
So maybe the biggest, but and you're saying influx, so of course it's semantics. Guess where the first Cape Verdean is recognized as coming from Cabo Verde? In the 1690s on Nantucket. So whaling probably too. Fisher people, okay, the Portuguese would come by Cabo Verde and pick up some of, in one of the posters in the Whaling Museum in New Bedford, it says, good, honest, hard-working men will work all day for a loaf of bread. So they were quasi-slavery. But now we are trying to figure out, and we'll have to do the timeline. When did the cranberry industry start here? In the 1800s, right? So everyone celebrates because New Bedford became the city that lit the world, is what the movie says. You know, the whale oil, although we almost annihilated the whale, so I'm not all that proud of it sometimes. But that's where Frederick Douglass had gone. But do they talk about Frederick Douglass going to Nantucket? He gave a presentation on Nantucket too. Okay, or two. And so we lived in and among Frederick Douglass back then. But if we find the first Cape Verdean, it's 1690 something in Nantucket. We were here before the 1800s. So people say, well, you Cape Verdeans have been here since, you know, the mid 1900s the mid 1800s, the 19th century. And I say, no, wait 1 minute. We've been here 300 years. So ergo, why is it taking this long to have a Cape Verdean museum?
I think the Portuguese were fishing the cod off of George's Bank pre-Pilgrim and bringing the fish back salted. So.
Where are the main communities of Cape Verdean?
So that's wonderful with New Bedford. Okay, so so don't forget, this is very, very difficult. Why Joe probably can't find all of this information. Many of them said they were Portuguese. And the Portuguese told them they were Portuguese. You hear all about the Portuguese festival in P-Town. We've got Cape Verdeans that came into P-Town in the 1700s. They owned property there. They were Portuguese, like Wesley. He loves it when I do that. They looked like Wesley. Would you call him a black man? Most people would not. But the white folks took over. Always took over. Why? Because if you look like me, you can tell I'm a black person. You look like Wesley, you can't tell. So his family said they were Portuguese. So the largest population, they say, was New Bedford.
Okay.
But I worked the Census Bureau too. I worked the partnership specialist, the first partnership specialist cadre. here on southeastern Massachusetts was 99 and 2000. We were tasked to go out and introduce the census to folks that weren't so familiar with it or wouldn't fill it out correctly. The basis for the Census Bureau cadre is to go out and try to get you to mail it back first before they have to come and knock door to door. That saves millions and all this time. Do you think I had an easy time getting my folks like Wesley's aunt to say,
No way.
go ahead, tell them.
No.
Wesley, let me break the fourth wall here as
Sure.
your camera person. Get into the light a little bit, because there have been multiple references to you in this presentation.
Yeah,
on,
a little,
Ricky.
a little bit, right?
Have a seat.
Tell them about your aunt, please.
Yeah,
And this
they've
is,
got a mic there, go ahead.
this is Cape Cod.
Yeah, basically, the families, when we grew up, and you came from my particular family, they were all white. They all looked white. There's no way you could tell the difference. But they assumed that they were Portuguese because they were told that. You know what I mean? So when they came over here, you were Portuguese. And I'll tell you, for a long time, that's what I thought I was. I never, entered my mind that I was anything else. And then until I started learning, that I was Cape Verdean. And that you are Cape Verdean if you're from the islands. If your family's from there, you're that. That's what you are. Has nothing to do with color. It's just where you're from. Where your family ancestral lies is what you are.
Tell them what you happened to trying to
Oh,
go to
my
school. No, well, school first.
No, nothing in school. Oh, yeah.
Roxbury?
Oh, yeah. Jeez.
We mean nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
He's trying to forget about it.
I try to forget a lot about that, but when my mother moved to Boston, that was very difficult times. I hated that place. You would go down the street, and they would look at you, totally not know what you are.
What are you?
You know what I mean? I'm not black, but I'm not white, because black people can see that you're not all white, or you're not this, or you're not that. You're just not them.
Pull that up.
So basically, it was a fight every day to go to school. I had to figure out, just like in the Army, I have to figure out my trail to go to school so I wouldn't get involved and getting beat up, fight and all that. So it was very difficult in school. Yeah, very difficult. Even in the school itself, it was always a challenge to deal with the school.
Were you attacked by both white and black?
There was no whites, that many whites where I grew up.
Okay.
So that really didn't come up much because it was segregated schools. So in the neighborhood, the only neighborhood they let you live in is all black.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's no way. In the way that they do it really well because they do it financially. They make the cheaper rents where the blacks could go because that's where they could go to afford it. And they would make the other places so expensive that black people don't make the money to go there.
And there was redlining, and you talked
That's
about redlining
basically
when you
it.
came to Falmouth. What about East Falmouth?
Yeah, here too. They do the same thing here in Falmouth. Redline us here too. That's why most of the Cape Verdeans lived on Sandwich Road. Because same reason, rents were cheaper, it was lower, and then a lot of the Cape Verdeans when they first moved here was basically for the farmland, so that they could work. The ones that didn't like the water much, they went on the land. They were farmers anyway. They learned how to grow food from the ground, so they would move here and work in the cranberry bogs, pick blueberry bush. As a young kid in Howard, because that's where my whole family was, I would go around, and that's how we made our money. We would go to all in the woods and pick up beach plums, pick raspberries, and we'd go to the store. That's how we'd get our candy and how we would keep fed, because we would just eat off the trees. Back when you could eat off the trees. Now that's a little more difficult with all the pollution and everything going on.
But what happened with your aunt? We mentioned that
Yeah.
twice, so
I
don't.
went and interviewed my aunt.
What year?
Yeah, that was a few years. She just died.
Just only 10 years ago.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, I went and interviewed her because I wanted to ask her some family questions and different things. And then I mentioned that I was I was telling her I'm Cape Verdean, and she looked at me like, what? She was very confused. Why are you saying you're Cape Verdean? She said, you're not Cape Verdean, you're Portuguese. I said, no. I said, I'm Cape Verdean. And she got mad at me. So I said, I just, you know, she's 90-something years old. I wasn't going to sit and argue with her about that. So I just stopped the conversation and kept on going. So,
And I said to him, so see, I'm more hard-hitting with this, you know, and so critical race theory I take, and I got upset with my uncle, you know, look at me, I'm black, but I'm still your niece, and don't say that I'm not family. Some of the family would say, I'm not their family, they didn't want to know me. But I said to him, why didn't you just tell her? You were, you know, a president of the Cape Verdean Club here on Sandwich Road, and you were proudly learning about your Cape Verdean heritage. This was colonial mentality. They, you know, beat it into you that you were Portuguese until we couldn't get the jobs or marry their daughters or sons. Then we weren't Portuguese anymore. And what Wesley said, being the man that he is, I wasn't going to argue with my 90-something-year-old aunt. I didn't need to make the point that badly. She had spent all of her life believing she was Portuguese. I just let it go.
and that's another reason why we lost our, our identity
Microphone.
as young Cape Verdeans, because our parents didn't want to teach us Creole. They said, no, you can't. When you're here in America, you speak English, because that's all they want to hear. So they wanted us to stay more in the back, so we'd have a much better opportunity to get work. But that didn't happen either. Same thing, you're working in the back. Go to the banks, same thing. Go to different places to live, same thing. It hasn't changed much, really.
You saw it with my cousin Clifford's paperwork. He would say, I'm just like any of you. I want to come in the bank and get a loan. And we were just talking about this the other day, talking about coming here. And he said, literally, I would go in to get a loan, the white man would get triple what I would get. They would trust me with maybe $5,000, they would trust him with $50,000. Why? He said, well, they see me as a black man. They know I'm Cape Verdean, and that happens. Discrimination has been built into the fabric of this country. There are laws built against it, but do you think everyone follows the law? No. Yes?
I've got a question for you. What impact did Truman's order to integrate the military have on Camp Edwards?
Truman's order to desegregate the military, I'm not as up on post-World War II history on it. However, Otis Air Force was commanded eventually by Chappie James, who was a Tuskegee Airman.
Oh.
So we,
When did that happen? That they
late is post-Korean War, because he was flying a jet when he was it was called Chappie's Chariot.
Yep.
We have a picture of his jet flying over Cape Cod, and they actually have a memorial to Chappie James,
Yep.
A jet out on the base. So I think he was the first two-star general in the Air Force.
I'm not positive about that. So they say black, African American. Don't forget what we're all saying about Cape Verdeans. So 2 Cape Verdeans I didn't put in here because we were trying to talk about the Cape, but thank you for this segue too, because I know Tuskegee Airmen, okay? One of the highest elected officials in Rhode Island was George Lima. He was a congressman, and he was an original Tuskegee Airman. Our friend, we interviewed him for the documentary. He was 92. He wasn't one of the actual original Tuskegee Airmen, but he was a Tuskegee Airman in the war. He literally said to us, though, that it was very, very difficult. him and even my cousin Darwin, who was in Vietnam War, what they said was they wanted to fly the planes. They were eager to go into the service, into the Air Force. Darwin said that he has a third class petty, white man, said, "Your people don't fly." This was in the 60s. And Darwin's on the interview that we did here. What do you mean our people don't fly? He said to that man, "Haven't you ever heard of the Tuskegee Airmen?" And that man said, "No, I don't believe any of that." He said, "It's in the books. You can read all about it." He pulled his application for being a pilot. And so that's how my cousin ended up in the Coast Guard and almost killed, because they wouldn't allow him even in the 60s. They just said, and so there's racism 190%, your people don't fly.
The movie Top Gun, you've seen that movie?
Of course.
The first Top Gun competition was won by Tuskegee Airmen.
Of course it was. So how come, who was it that was the hero in Top Gun? Tom Cruise?
Yeah, but this was in the
But how come
50s.
they didn't make a movie with us in it?
Yeah.
I would say often we're the cranberry pickers. Well, Ocean Spray didn't put us in their commercials. We don't get residuals. We got the grunt work, and everybody else got the celebration. That's the way it still happens many
So the
times.
Army Air Corps wasn't here on the Cape during the war?
Oh, yeah, it was. Otis was an active field, was cemented.
Training school there?
No, the anti-submarine, convoy escort. They had British planes flying convoy escort out of, and then the Navy took over in '44. Otis became Auxiliary Naval Air Station, Quonset Point, Otis. That's the quick way, the military name. And it was Auxiliary Naval Air Station, Quonset Point, Hyannis. George Bush crashed a plane in Hyannis. I don't know if we have time, but afterwards we can go around and show you some of the photographs and effects we have on our display up at this wonderful institution.
However, don't forget about race. So you're saying, well, Cape Cod, it was famous here. We know plenty of people, they came here for the dances, the segregated dances and things. Just because Otis was here. So Andrews Farm, you all know of Andrews Farm now, huh? They became millionaires. It was a Cape Verdean man and his uncle who bought 1 or 2 acres and then 10 acres, and then he had Tony Andrews and his wife Marina, 7 sons, and they kept the farm going. But what the oldest son, who is Anthony Andrews, he interviewed with us for that documentary 3 years ago, and what he said was, I would go to Otis. When my father would go there to work, I went with him as a kid. I loved the planes. I wanted to fly. And he did eventually get to fly. But I said, well, what was your father doing? He was paving the roads. So some of it, of course, got a little better. At least the second or third generation would get an opportunity. But my cousin has PTSD. He can no longer work. He said to me that he can't even sleep in the same room with his wife because he wakes up in the middle of the night with terrors and he might hurt her. And so this is how it has impacted his whole life. His father said, you are going through just what I went through back in the 40s. What do you mean it hasn't changed that much? It has changed slightly, of course. Look at 4-star General Gary Brito. On the way here, I heard something about McChrystal. Eugene Andrews told me he ended up, he's the 3rd brother of Tony and Marina, he ended up working at West Point as a professor. They put him through school to finish, okay? And he had in his cadre to train McChrystal, General McChrystal. And they were talking about him today on, I guess it's to do with the LGBTQ issue in the military right now, trans or not. And so McChrystal is saying we should all be allowed to be who we are. So we could talk about racism, but it's any of those isms. When I was a young girl, they didn't want women in the military. When I worked at FEMA in the census, I was racially and sexually harassed. You don't know how many times. I had to get out. I couldn't take it anymore.
Not too many years ago, you guys couldn't even vote.
Women,
Think about that.
yep.
Yeah.
So the beat goes on. We had gone a lot further than we have lately. People say, is it really worse than it was when you were a kid? Yeah. Yeah. We've made some progress, but there's still so much to go. But why discrimination continues with us? People would say to us, well, I worked hard to get what I got. So did we. But if there was redlining, and if there were extra issues with the banks, and when I bought my house and put $10,000 down on a $35,000 house in '77, but the interest rate was twice that of my friends, I worked hard too. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What if you don't have boots? They didn't give us boots to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. And that is generational wealth. You folks, many folks, talk about what you've gotten over the years and what your parents could leave to you. Even if it was just education, your parents could leave that to you. My mother thirsted to go to college. She got a double promotion in first grade. She could not go to college. She had to help make money for the family. I couldn't go to college right after high school. I had to take care of the family. But I went in the '90s to get my daughters into college so they wouldn't have to go through what I've gone through. But right now, who is making the least amount of money? Who's losing the most jobs in this country? Black women. Full circle, right back around again.
I think that's good, Gina.
Well, Barbara, I hope we're at a positive note about three minutes ago. Shall we wrap it up there? I think we've had a fantastic conversation tonight, and I want to leave you time to tour with Joe. He's got the exhibition here through the end of February. I want everybody to be invited to come check out his material. Barbara, unlike Joe, has the permanent space on Davisville Road, the Cape Cod, Cape Verdean. I've been there numerous times now, and I look forward to the next time I can go. Joe Yukna, Cape Cod Military Museum. Barbara, Cape Cod, Cape Verdean Museum. Thank you both so much. This has been such a wonderful use of this space. Thank you. Let's give her one more hand. Appreciate you.